When I spotted my sister Emily at the airport, she raised an eyebrow and quipped, "I wish you'd come to my wedding." Her voice dripped with sarcasm, and I knew there was more to her words. Emily had claimed to be pregnant with my husband, Bob's child, and had subsequently taken him away from me. She must have felt on top of the world, being married to a pilot. Moreover, she had snatched him from me after we had quarreled while living together. Her sense of superiority must have been overwhelming. To add insult to injury, she and Bob were planning an extravagant wedding, and she couldn't stop boasting about their plans to move abroad. As she waited for her flight, laden with a large suitcase and a duffel bag, she looked positively ecstatic. In contrast, I arrived at the airport with minimal luggage, prepared to return home whenever. I had deliberately dressed lightly, ready to leave once my business, which I had informed her about over the phone, was concluded. She probably expected me to be upset, but I wasn't about to stand by silently. I knew Bob much better than she did. Pretending ignorance, I handed Emily an envelope containing crucial information, saying casually, "Here, you forgot this. My name is Jennifer Thompson, a 40-year-old housewife from a coastal area, married to a pilot. Bob is 47, and we met at a group date organized by friends when I had just moved to New York in my mid-20s. I attended these gatherings to expand my social circle, not expecting to settle down. I never believed in love at first sight, prioritizing personality over looks when dating, although I had a weakness for persistence. Bob initially struck me as a ladies' man, charming and easygoing, but I sensed he had ulterior motives. Despite my initial reservations, Bob's relentless pursuit won me over. We started dating after a dinner, and now, over a decade later, we are married. My old friends often joke that they never imagined I'd settle down with someone like Bob, and I can't help but agree. True to my initial impression, Bob had been involved with other women before we tied the knot. Whenever I confronted Bob about his affairs, he'd insist, "You're the only one I love, Jennifer," skillfully deflecting my accusations. Initially, not eager for a relationship, I had simply requested him to stop cheating and let it go. Despite the infidelity, our relationship was generally enjoyable. Bob made an effort to celebrate anniversaries and birthdays, even taking on household chores without being asked. Although I loved cooking, he often took care of the dishes. If not for the issue of infidelity, I would have considered myself lucky to have him. When he proposed, weighing the pros against the cons, I accepted, emphasizing that there would be no more cheating after tying the knot. Thanks to Bob's pilot salary, our wedding was grand. He spared no expense, getting me the expensive dresses I desired, and the food and cake were top-notch. It was a luxurious celebration, leaving my family overjoyed and me incredibly happy. My sister Emily, looking at me in my glamorous dress, expressed her jealousy as her dreams of a grand wedding grew. However, not many years after this joyous occasion, Bob resumed his infidelity. Our downtown apartment became a hotbed of gossip due to nosy neighbors, repeatedly informing me of Bob's questionable activities. In an attempt to get him to confess, I would line up air fresheners at the front door whenever I heard such rumors. Even when he admitted to his actions, he never truly stopped cheating. Despite this, I oddly never felt the urge to divorce him. I don't know if this is a good or bad thing, but for now, I keep repeating, "Please don't cheat anymore," almost as if it has become a catchphrase. One summer's day, as I waved goodbye to Bob and did the laundry, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. It was too early for a delivery, piquing my curiosity. Upon checking the intercom, I saw a large suitcase and my younger sister Emily on the screen. "I'll be right there," I quickly said, hurrying to finish up the laundry. Despite Emily being my sister, I didn't want her to witness the mess of my daily life. Emily and I have a significant age gap. I'm 40 and she's 27, a difference of 13 years. Our relationship feels more like that of an aunt and niece than actual siblings. After finishing the laundry, I opened the door to welcome Emily inside. "What brings you here, especially with such a large suitcase?" She explained that she had to leave her place after quitting her job. I couldn't afford rent after quitting, she added. According to Emily, she was transferred to a different department at work last October, where she faced mistreatment from her female supervisor. Despite her hard work, she was frequently scolded for being slow, and recently, they stopped assigning her tasks altogether. Unable to secure a transfer, she felt compelled to resign. I couldn't help but feel a bit sympathetic, but it seemed unusual for Emily, who was usually favored by older colleagues, to experience such treatment. Well, there are all kinds of people out there, I reasoned. I was so done with that company, I quit on my own terms. She left her job at the end of May and, having no savings, couldn't afford her rent, resulting in her eviction. Despite earning slightly more than the average wage for someone in her 20s, I was puzzled by her lack of savings. Perhaps she had indulged in high-end cosmetics or designer brands. Emily had always been impulsive since childhood, often acting without thinking things through. I was honestly dumbfounded that she hadn't outgrown it. You really should start taking responsibility for your actions, I thought to myself. So, what are you going to do now? I asked, concerned. She had nowhere to live. She might need to return to our family home or find a job with dormitory accommodation. There were many things that needed to be done, and she seemed unprepared, not even having started looking for a new job. As her older sister, I felt responsible for giving her advice. But as I pondered the situation, Emily asked, "Can I stay here for a while?" The thought of living with my younger sister at this age never crossed my mind, and I was quite taken aback. Certainly, staying in this house would allow her to remain in the city without having to return to our family home, where she would face our parents' questions and more. If Emily wanted to continue her life in New York, staying away from our hometown seemed like the most logical choice. However, it wasn't solely my decision to make. I had to wait for Bob to return. Let's discuss it with Bob first. Thanks, I replied to Emily. Honestly, I wish she would try to sort things out on her own for once. When Bob returned and heard Emily's story, he agreed without hesitation. Despite my reservations, I swallowed my words, feeling I had to accept it since Bob was on board. I decided to let Emily use the guest room meant for unexpected visitors and led her there. Thus began life for the three of us, myself, Bob, and Emily. Even though Emily was staying with us, she willingly helped with meals and house chores. However, oddly enough, she made no apparent efforts to find a new job. It became problematic if she thought she could live with us indefinitely, with no savings of her own, as it would mean Bob, and I would have to support her financially. I wondered if I was being too harsh for wanting her to get on her feet sooner. Part of me longed to go back to living with just Bob. Whenever I asked Emily if she had found a job yet, she gave vague answers. When Bob was away for work, my once free time started feeling increasingly intruded by Emily's presence. Having someone else around during my me time felt more invasive than I had imagined. There was always the sense of another person, the need for small talk. It just wasn't relaxing. While I could tolerate making more food since I loved cooking, the added work for an extra person in terms of chores felt burdensome. Sometimes, when checking the guest room, I found her lazily watching videos online or munching on snacks. Her lazy attitude became more evident as she stopped helping around the house recently, and my patience was wearing thin. It would be a month since Emily started living with us, and her lack of effort in job hunting pushed me to the edge. I knocked on her door and confronted her with a stern tone. "When are you going to start working?" Without turning away from the movie she was watching, Emily replied nonchalantly, "I know. Okay," while stuffing another snack into her mouth. At that moment, something inside me snapped. Why didn't you at least show some effort? Surprised by my outburst, Emily paused her movie and looked at me. "You need to straighten up. This isn't your house," I continued, unable to hold back. I poured out all my frustrations that had built up over the month. After venting, I felt a bit guilty for not being more composed, but that feeling quickly vanished with Emily's next words. "I told you I know. You're the older sister, so you should be taking care of me," she retorted. Wondering why I had to care for my grown-up sister, I tried to continue our argument, but I decided to take a deep breath instead. I had always known Emily to be selfish, but it seemed she had gotten worse with age. Thinking there was no point in talking to her now, I told her with a soft voice, "If you're just gonna laze around, you should leave," and then left the room. After that, Emily's lazy tendencies escalated. She started treating the guest room as her own, eating snacks I bought without permission, leaving trash everywhere, and not cleaning up her clothes or other belongings. Every time I saw her lazy behavior, I'd tell her enough's enough, but she'd just respond with, "Oh, come on," leading to countless arguments. I was getting fed up with this stressful living situation. Then, while at the supermarket, I ran into our neighbor, Mrs. Roberts, who told me something unbelievable. "Hey, I saw your husband Bob and your sister Emily downtown last Sunday," she said. I found it odd to hear that Emily went out, but as I waited for Mrs. Roberts to continue, she leaned in closer and whispered, "They seemed really close." As I was wondering why someone would pay such close attention, Mrs. Roberts spoke a shocking statement. "I think they might be involved in a romantic relationship." Initially, I thought to take the gossip-loving Mrs. Roberts' words with a grain of salt, but the certainty in her voice was unsettling. For the moment, I brushed it off with a smile, saying, "Thank you for letting me know," and parted ways with her. Regardless of Bob being a philanderer, he should know better than to get involved with his wife's sister. Although I wanted to take it with a grain of salt, the certainty in her voice bothered me. Some days later, while getting the mail, another neighbor, Mrs. Smith, mentioned, "Bob and Emily were out yesterday. It seems that your husband and your sister went for a drive. They seem to get along really well." Unlike Mrs. Roberts, Mrs. Smith didn't seem interested in probing into a romantic relationship between them, but rather wanted to discuss the warmth of family ties. She wore a gentle smile on her face. "Yesterday, I was out meeting a friend, and Bob was typically at work, so Emily should have been home alone." However, Mrs. Smith must have recognized Bob's car and probably did witness them together. I thanked Mrs. Smith briefly and quickly returned to my room. I called the two of them to the living room, took a deep breath, and calmly asked, "Did you two go out together yesterday?" Bob, without showing any sign of embarrassment, simply responded, "Yeah, we did. I took Emily to the job center." "You wanted Jennifer to start working soon, didn't you?" Following Bob's comment, Emily added in a matching tone, "Yeah, he just gave me a ride." I decided not to press the issue further and brought up what Mrs. Roberts had mentioned. "By the way, a neighbor mentioned you two seem quite close. Is that so?" Hearing that, Bob crossed his arms and replied, "What's that about? She's my wife's sister. Of course, I'd be kind to her." He then showed a somewhat annoyed attitude and asked, "Is that all?" before retreating to his own room. Casting a quick glance towards Emily, she awkwardly turned her face away and headed back to her guest room. I felt something was off, but I couldn't gather any further information from them. Days went by, and I had to endure Emily's lazy attitude, who showed no interest in finding a job and seemed too comfortable in our home. Getting tired of arguing with her and urging her to work, I kept our conversations minimal and tried not to interact much. I wonder if everything seemed calm on the surface. After about 2 years, while I was preparing to go shopping in my room, Emily suddenly called me to the living room. She looked somewhat proud, and I thought she was about to announce her new job. Instead, she had me sit on the sofa and drop the bombshell. "I'm pregnant." Confused, I asked, "Pregnant? What do you mean?" She replied confidently, "I mean I'm carrying Bob's child." The shock was equivalent to a slap on the face. I recalled what Mrs. Roberts had said 2 years ago. I couldn't believe my sister and my husband had an affair. Seeing my disturbed face, a smug Emily added, "Bob said he'll marry me." She then looked down on me triumphantly and declared, "Bob is mine." That evening, when Bob returned, I demanded an explanation. He showed sincere apology and expressed his desire to raise the child. A part of me wished for a denial, but Bob's response confirmed the bitter truth, and I struggled to accept it. That night, I couldn't stop pondering our next steps. Feeling that tomorrow's me might have an answer, I decided to sleep early. The next day, waking up early, I started browsing on my computer. I researched the possible settlement I could claim in case of divorce due to their betrayal and about the apartment we had purchased together. The mere idea of him being with another woman was intolerable, let alone getting my sister pregnant. Divorce seemed the only option, and I was determined. From my research, it appeared that our district accepted digital divorce transactions, so I downloaded the form on my phone and went to a local store to print it out. As I was leaving, I felt Emily's eyes on me, but I didn't look back. After getting my errand done, I locked myself in my room and started filling out divorce papers. Considering he expressed the desire to raise the child, it was clear he wanted a divorce. A court case seemed unnecessary. A simple mutual agreement would do. I listed down my terms and, holding the completed divorce papers, knocked on Bob's door. Upon recognizing me, he opened the door immediately. He agreed to the divorce, paying a one-time settlement of $30,000 and to sell the apartment we had bought together. While I wondered how he and Emily planned to support themselves, I found it absurd to sympathize with the two betrayers. I stuck to my terms and made sure they paid in full. Once the apartment sale was over, we started our separate lives. However, it wasn't long before I received a snarky call from Emily. "We're gonna have a wedding even more extravagant than what you had, just the two of us," she boasted. I couldn't care less, but I still responded, "Well, good for you." "We're even planning to move abroad," Emily said over the phone, her voice brimming with excitement. She must feel pretty good about taking him away from me. They were about to go on a trip abroad, partly to scout for potential places to relocate. I couldn't help but wonder what Emily knows about Bob, her fiancé, especially since he was actually laid off 2 months before Emily announced her pregnancy. Bob and I had some savings at the time, so I didn't feel the need to tell Emily, and it seems that Bob probably hadn't told her either. The reason for his termination? An affair. He was caught red-handed with a married flight attendant, and he had to pay a hefty settlement to her husband. On top of that, he's also paying me a settlement, so I'm pretty sure his savings are nearly depleted. Life is unpredictable, and my decision to let things slide may just come back to haunt Emily and Bob. Emily, in her ignorance, keeps gloating on the phone. When she tells me they're leaving for a trip abroad the day after tomorrow, I say, "All right, I'll drop off some luggage you left behind," and hang up. On the day of their departure, I make my way to the airport, looking for Emily. I find her sitting alone in front of an airport cafe. As soon as she sees me, she says, "Jennifer, why didn't you come to my wedding?" Her voice tinged with spite. Ignoring her, I get straight to the point. "Here, this is from Bob," I say, handing her an envelope. Emily's face turns ashen as she reads the contents. "Your husband, Bob, is not just out of a job as a pilot. He's completely unemployed," I state calmly. Visibly shaking, she yells, "Stop lying." But I reply, "He's probably nearly broke by now." After explaining everything to her, she screams, "I can't believe this," and storms off, drawing cold stares from the people around her. I really thought happiness could come easily. I mumble to myself, feeling somewhat relieved. I leave the airport and head to my small restaurant in a city far removed from New York. After that, I use the settlement and the proceeds from selling the house to start a small diner in a town far from the city, capitalizing on my passion for cooking. Although I can't prepare gourmet dishes, my traditional American comfort food has been well received by the locals. On the other hand, Emily and Bob seem to be struggling quite a bit. Emily returned to our parents' home for childbirth, seeking help. However, she didn't raise the child and left the child at her parents' home, and now her whereabouts are unknown. It sounds like she can't bear living with our parents nagging since they heard her situation in detail from me. Bob, denied access by my parents and unable to find work, still insists on paying child support. Whether she's lost touch with reality or genuinely cares about the child, her future seems fraught with challenges. It's uncertain if they're still together, but Bob hasn't yet met the child my parents are raising. Ironically, Bob had divorced me because he wanted kids. I decided to steer clear of irresponsible people like them. I'm happy with my current life, and I plan to keep working hard to make my small restaurant a